Zoom. Hello. So I just started recording this meeting. Today is July 30th. Unfortunately, we're still in 2020. This is SED meeting. So we have, can everybody see my screen? If no, I take it as okay. Okay, good, thank you. So we have 3 topics in the shared doc today. Let's start with Pia. Did I say your name right?
Hello, I'm Piotr. I'm kind of starting working on etcd or contributing to etcd, and we operate pretty big fleet of etcd servers powering Kubernetes. And one of our problems is like compatibility of Kubernetes and etcd versions, and deciding which components need to be in exact versions as underlying etcd servers, which one are tied more to the client side of etcd, and whether client from etcd 3.3 operates well with etcd 3.5, or in general, what's the compatibility set of version between Kubernetes and etcd, because practically we cannot assume keeping the exact version Kubernetes was built with in all operation scenarios. So I started to look into this problem, and as part of this, like, the idea was that it would be easier to think or define this compatibility if we could clearly distinguish what components we have. As I see in CLs in etcd current master that are introducing proper Go modules, the modules v3, that conform to all the rules required for modules. I wonder whether it makes sense to split these modules even further, like into separate client and API that contains Protos, to have the server ones. And if we have such split, then natural is to have integration test as a separate module. And then we could, and it still stays as part of the single repository. So this does not create all the burden of having 3 different repos and inconsistent commits between them. And this way we have clear definition what are the dependencies, and we isolate the dependencies that are for the server, that is over 40 of them, from the dependencies that are part of the client. And this way users are less likely to get conflicts. So I have some branch where I've tried to move the files and define the modules, and I think it's feasible and not that hard, and wanted to gather feedback whether continuing on this makes sense.
So, like, I have a question. So right now, if your project import etcd client, does it like adding all the like VoltDB, like gRPC gateway into your project?
So the Go modules dependency in Kubernetes imports the whole, all things, including VoltDB. And a part of this Kubernetes is separately, for sake of test, importing the whole targz, but never in the code source compilation path, depending on any of these items.
We need to check like why Kubernetes is doing that way, but I assume they are using some kind of embed package. Like,
I think Kubernetes uses embed in some of the tests.
Okay, makes sense.
Yes. But the Go modules dependencies are not allowing, as defined currently, to express including only client libraries. Either you include whole module with all dependencies or you don't include it. So the split is the moment when we could define it easy for users to include only part.
Yeah, I think it's good practice. I think I've seen it like somewhere in some other projects. And but the one concern I have, like we very sensitive about the like a gRPC, like upstream dependency. So as long as we keep those two in sync, like one in client and then one in server, I think like, I don't see any issue.
So I think gRPC in general is pretty well cooperative. Like gRPC client in one version can speak to gRPC in the other major version. So I think even if there is slight split, then it would work. But if we version these Go modules together, the 357 of etcd client would have the same gRPC version as 357 of etcd server.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, so yeah, I think we would love to look at your prototype branch. Like, is it in your private like fork? Can you just make a PR maybe?
Yes, so like I can make PR. It's like either pretty big PR or I can make it as a family of smaller ones. So I have one more question because that's a question mark on the slide. Because etcd control is pretty problematic in the split because majority of etcd command line tool depends only on the client libraries. And that would be nice to keep it together with the client code as customer depend on this. But there are 4 exceptions that depend on like commands that operate directly on files that are verify snapshot, restore snapshot, and migrate from v2 to v3. And I think there is one more comment in this style. So these are things that have pretty big dependencies on server. And the question is like whether it would make sense potentially to split etcd control into etcd control that depends on client and, for example, etcd admin that is tied to server and operates on these files directly.
It feels like there's a bit of a code smell in the fact that you have to have that dependency at all, right? The fact that kubectl needs to depend on stuff that we really consider kind of almost part of server internals kind of hints at the fact that like our snapshot format being just like a boltdb file might not be the best thing long term. Like maybe we actually need a format there. But so you could imagine if you actually did that eventually, like if there's actually a formal format there, then maybe you wouldn't need that dependency and things would get simpler. But yeah, I don't know what exactly the best thing is to do in the short term.
Yeah, maybe we can just highlight that like in the PR and then we can discuss there, because I would like to see the CI data point, because like right now, like I'm not sure if this is gonna work in the CI.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I agree. I think we could talk out some of those details separate.
Okay, so I will write a doc and so should we check if the 3 module split when etcd control stays with server for now works in CI and potentially decide whether we move forward with moving etcd CTL to client or splitting it.
Yeah, I think that's okay for now. Just leave it in the way that works, where it depends on the server. Make a note that we know that that's not ideal. It's arguably probably not worse than what we have today. And then we can work on CI and some of those details, and then maybe circle back on it if we have any ideas.
Thank you.
Yeah, Piotr, after you have the PR, could you add the link to the shared folder, shared doc? So
Sure.
Yeah, just add a little more about Piotr. He joined me. He is my colleague and worked on GKE, and he has a very strong Google Cloud background. He ramped up on SD pretty quick, as you can see. So the next item, Max Englander.
Hello. Yeah, Max here, also a first-time contributor to etcd. I've got a couple PRs here, a documentation design proposal, and then an implementation of the proposal in its current form for adding the ability to auto-promote learner nodes. Right now, when you add a learner node, it eventually catches up with the master's log, and then you can manually promote that learner to a voter. So it's my understanding that it's part of etcd's 3.5 roadmap to automatically promote these nodes. So with some guidance from some etcd maintainers, I've put together a design and implementation there, but haven't yet gotten to the point where it's, I think, being actively reviewed and tracked for being merged. So just wanted to try to bump it along, get some additional feedback and comments, and hopefully get it to a code review stage.
Yeah, so Max, oh, sorry for the delay. Yeah, would you mind assigning that to me and Jingyi?
Yeah, it looks like Jingyi reviewed it last year.
Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, sure, I'll ping you on the PR as well.
Yeah, I see you also brought this up last etcd meeting.
Oh, I wasn't able to attend the last one because of a conflict, so should probably cross them off that.
I will take a look, and then also I will let Jingyi know. Maybe can we ping Jingyi?
Yeah, happy to ping both of you in a comment.
Yeah, Gil-Ho, you're the next.
Yeah, can we click the link?
Yes.
I think Shyam also here. Maybe Shyam has more context in this issue. Shyam, you there?
I don't see.
Yeah,
Shyam.
he's there.
Oh, Shyam. Okay.
Hey folks, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Hey everyone. Been some time since I saw some of the familiar faces. I think Menjia. I've seen her last at KubeCon. Oh, and by the way, I was working in this scalability team at GK in the past in Warsaw office. So I also know Piotr. Cool. Okay. So this is one issue which we observed recently, and I cut an issue, and this was already discussed in 6 scale meeting. So essentially, there are two parts to this problem. What's happening is, so when I was running some load tests on my cluster, at one point when there are a lot of write requests coming to etcd, around that time there was a defrag operation which happened, and basically that relates to that spike that you see with call latency. So what happened is many of the write calls, they just got piled up and they were just waiting to happen. And so because of that, so there are two things which happened. Firstly, some of them received too many requests from like etcd server too many requests error, which is one problem. The others timed out, which is also kind of related to the fact that etcd was not able to process any writes during that time. So the thing which I think I haven't fully understood yet is, so there are, in the graph that you see at the bottom there, right, there are two spikes. One is, I think, a pink spike, and to the right there is a blue spike. The blue spike was actually one which happened on the leader, and that was around the time when I saw multiple errors, right? Timed out errors and too many requests. But the one on follower, it seems like that didn't cause any errors during that time. It was just a matter of chance that they were happened that close by. But the issue is, so more or less we think I think we understand this part, that why those writes got stalled, because it seems like around that defrag is currently holding a lock on the whole HCD database, so writes can't happen while a defrag is happening. And for some reason, the defrag took a long time, like 25 seconds or 28 seconds. Yeah, so something like that. Typically, it takes 5 to 6 seconds. For this instance, it took longer. Now going back to the two parts of the problem I was saying earlier, the first one is, so when this happened, when HCD returned too many request error to API server actually returned like 500 to the client. So the first thing, that's the first issue, like how should API server be handling this? Should it actually return 500 or should it return 429? Because it itself got too many requests from HCD. And the other thing is, should API server have some kind of throttling mechanism when such a thing happens, right? When you get these kind of errors from the HCD, should it throttle maybe for a few seconds or something like that to avoid making things even worse by allowing even more write requests? So that's one part. We plan to discuss that in like the API machinery SIG. The second part, which is particularly, I think, related to HCD, and I discussed this a bit with Juho already, is like, how do we, so the issue, the reason why HCD seems to return this too many server error is because the applied index, so this is what actually Juho and me found when we were looking together. So the applied index is actually lagging behind the committed index. So basically, new transactions were being accepted by RAF, but they were not being applied fast enough. Probably because of like the limitation on the, no, sorry, not the limitation on the disk, but because the DB was logged, these raft entries were getting piled up, but they weren't being applied. So the question is, what should be the HCD behavior in such cases? Like, should it be like accepting these raft requests even when, for example, a defrag is happening, or it knows that it's being piled up? And the other thing which I think Jingi and Juho brought up, so maybe Juho can talk about it further, is that if this issue can happen even with a follower. So with the leader, we observed this. I don't know why it didn't happen with the follower, but it seems like even with a follower, so when this applied and committed index is lagging behind, right, on the leader itself, any write which comes to it, it seems like it's not accepting it and it's just returning too many errors. But if the write somehow lands on this other instance, which is not a leader, some follower, where this is not a problem, then it will still try to replicate the raft entry, and the leader then basically is still accepting it. So this is like kind of a hack around, like leader itself won't accept writes, but coming through peers it can accept, and then the same issue might run again. So essentially, like, what do you guys suggest that we do here in this case for HCD to avoid this problem? One thing we spoke about is like, I was thinking earlier might work, is like if you change the leader before calling a defrag, right, then you can make sure that you're never calling a defrag on a leader. If you like force a re-election or something like that, but I don't know how well that works.
Yeah, I like what you're thinking. It feels like there's two separate problems. One problem is, how do we make how do we prevent defrag from being so disruptive? I think that problem does need to be solved. I think the other problem is more like, if the cluster is overloaded, and defrag is one example of how you can do that today, like how does that get like surfaced back to clients in the best way possible, right? Is there some kind of back pressure that we can have so that clients know to back off and understand that like this isn't just the server having some weird error, it's actually like just overloaded and you kind of need to wait a minute.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I don't know. I don't know if the second one's worth solving right now. I feel like getting defrag to the point where it is less disruptive is actually kind of urgent. It's a completely stop the world operation. Like it holds a pretty coarse grain lock and can run for quite a long time.
Yeah, so yeah, this cure. So yeah, I can add more. Like I dig in like more code base, and then like I found something even worse. So I think we have some like durability issues, and then this can happen in any node. So if you scroll all the way down, so error too many requests being returned from SCD can indicate that we have like too many pending entries like waiting to be applied. And then I look at the code, and then the issue stems from, we have two separation. One is replication layer, and then the other one is like apply layer for the replicated state machine. And then like the replication layer, like what is not being blocked, like even there is a delay in the apply. Like we don't sync between two. So in the worst case, we have too many pending entries waiting to be applied, and then the server crashes. No, we just lose that entries. And then I look at the rough paper. Like we are supposed to be tracking the like last applied index and then compare that with the committed index and then replay those entries into the database. But we don't do that for the VaultDB. Like we just lose those pending entries because it was just pending on memory. So I think that's like one durability issue like we have. So I think we need to fix this. Like we already persist the consistent index on this. So when the server when the server restart, we can just replay those entries from the wall log and then apply those back to VaultDB. But we don't do that right now.
Yeah, that's pretty serious. I think that just has to be fixed. We should probably have an independent issue just for that.
Yeah.
So, Joe, going back to what you were saying earlier, that you're right that if we fix defrag, then probably we are like kind of avoiding this situation.
Yeah,
so
that might be
probably. Sorry, I meant that might make the seriousness of handling it properly in the API server level. It might reduce that seriousness if you fix defrag itself. But my suspicion is like this issue can even happen. So I couldn't reproduce it myself yet, but this issue could also happen independent of defrag, right? Let's say, if, for example, a slow disk and stuff. And I was talking to Wojtek about this, and he also mentioned that he saw this issue in the past in some clusters. He observed this. So yeah. So what do you think? Is it?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's, well, now that I know about what Guho just said, I think there are actually three issues. One is what he was saying about the applied entries. One is that we don't really have things tooled right so that when the server becomes overloaded, that you kind of get the appropriate, you know, degraded behavior, right? Like the system should degrade as gracefully as possible in that situation, and the 500s are probably not the best. And then maybe as a short-term mitigation just for defrag, we could look at what's wrong there. Some background there is defrag historically has provided two things of value. One is that it finds unusable free space. It basically does a copy and collect operation. So any little regions of pages that are unusable get freed up. All the data gets like copied into a new copy of the database and densely packed as possible. That used to be more important because we had this thing called the free list that we persisted, and the free list is this very linear thing that wasn't very efficient. In more modern versions of VaultDB, we don't persist the free list. We have some slightly more intelligent kind of allocation strategies around it. Defrag doesn't have the performance benefits it used to have. It still can help you get rid of some garbage space, but that's probably not as urgent. So that part of what defrag used to do has been fixed, at least one of those two things. The other thing it does is it downsizes the file size, right? If your file has grown in size to be quite large at a high watermark, but now it's smaller again when you defrag, you'll reclaim that space back. Your file size will actually drop. DB will never decrease your file size unless you defrag. So it'll be the largest of whatever your high watermark was in terms of size. So sometimes there's a benefit to doing that if you've got like some kind of load that had some spike and then now you want to get that space back. If that problem was solved, like, I guess my point is, some of the things that defrag used to make defrag valuable aren't valuable anymore. And of the remaining things, I kind of question whether or not users should really have to explicitly call defrag, or if like the system could figure something out or do something more incrementally to solve those problems, to avoid having to do this stop the world operation. But that's kind of like, you would have to basically go and re-engineer defrag, which is a bigger change. One option is to just, in many cases, I suspect that you don't even need to call it, right? Like, it used to be that you had to call it in criteria that was a lot more stringent, and now I would argue that like you really shouldn't be calling it nearly as much as you used to in like the era of like 3.1 or something. So that's one mitigation to think about, is either just calling defrag less or see if we can eliminate some of those things.
So is this related to these changes that you said, which no longer make it that relevant? Is it specific to some HCD version? Like
3.4 has the latest free list improvements. I'm trying to remember the history here. We stopped serializing the free list in like 3.2 or something. Don't quote me on that, but on a version a couple ago. And then we introduced a more intelligent allocation strategy, I think in 3.4. So I think at that point, I would really kind of question if you need to be calling defrag very much at all. It seems like it becomes much less valuable.
I see. So let's say we didn't.
I would love an etcd that users don't have to care about or think about when they should call defrag. It's kind of like a really gross problem to push onto users. Like, what's the criteria for when you should call defrag? How would I know if that's right? Like, it's a stop the world operation is really expensive. I don't want to call it too much. When should I do it?
Exactly. Yeah. So it kind of seems weird that we have to call it.
The good news is I actually think in 3.4 the answer might be that you very rarely need to call it, and it mostly might be based on like, is your file size way huger than you really want it to be? Like, are you reaching the point where you're going to have to fail in some other means because the file size is getting too big? Like the amount of disk space that you expected it to have is getting enriched or something like that.
Yeah, I think Joe has really good point. I think the reason, like for the context, the reason why we added the defrag, we have a database quota size for each cluster, and then like we have an alarm like when it was like breaching the, let's say like a 4 GB, and then but like right now I'm thinking like it's not really like doesn't help with anything. But like I have a question. So have you guys any noticed like when the DB size grows, like did the like a restore like a latency, did it go up at all? Or like, that was one of our concerns because we wanted to DB size as compact as possible to reduce the restore like latency.
Yeah, that's a totally valid concern. I think both, you know, creating backups and doing restores are like, because you're basically copying the whole file, including all the free spaces, all the 0 bytes, or not 0 bytes, but the junk bytes you don't care the value of. There's kind of like a needless expense to doing those operations. Maybe it would be better to have a format where we don't include free pages in the snapshots so that we can avoid that. But that would also be like an improvement. But if you did that, then you could argue that like maybe one of the other, I mean, I think we're just finding more reasons why defrag matters, but if we could like list those out and address them individually, I think we might actually get to the point where defrag becomes very rarely needed.
Yeah, I think, Sean, I think we need to do some tests, like see if we like just get rid of defrag and then like see if that introduce any regression in the restore path.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just one more question. So now that we are not calling defrag to, like you were saying, to free up those unused pages, does that mean the file size can grow arbitrarily, or?
So if you don't defrag at all, then there is the potential for your file to grow arbitrarily, but compaction is still happening, so you're still freeing up space you don't need. You will tend to converge on some kind of file size that is representative of kind of the high watermark of what your workload requires. Unless there are pathological cases, right? Like you can construct inputs where like you'll always be creating like little garbage spaces that you can't fit new objects in and are kind of like a true fragmentation problem in the classic sense. But that's really pretty pathological. Kubernetes doesn't really tend to do that. So yeah, usually you'll converge to some like file size that's pretty sane. And like if you do compact it, you're probably just going to grow it back to that file size again at your next heavy load of whatever your workflow is or your workload is.
Okay.
So if I understood the Bolt correctly, it tries to take first free page to use it when it needs to store some data. So this potentially allows to having a cheap defrag that is not really defrag, it's a truncate file to the needed high watermark plus, let's say, 10% of the free space. That should be a really quick operation as opposed to full defrag that is copying the whole accessible content of the database.
Yeah, you could imagine if we did something like that just solved the actual like allocation or space problem, then that would get us a long ways because you could kind of build on that. You could implement that. You could even potentially, before we trigger the alarm, make one last attempt. Just do that without even asking the user. Just have etcd automatically do something like that before it triggers the alarm, and only trigger the alarm if there's still no space left. So you could kind of like internalize this stuff into the etcd system so that users don't have to be aware of it.
Okay, so just one more follow-up question on that. So if like what Piotr is saying, if it's about truncating these unused, let's say some amount of unused pages, then does that operation have to be blocking anymore for writes? Or maybe
I would love
I'm
for us to have some kind of, I would love us to have something that's not like defrag today, that still did most of what we needed and wasn't like a stop the world copy to a new database. And it probably should be built into BoltDB. Like BoltDB should probably offer us some operation that is not a complete stop the world, that doesn't require you have twice the storage space of what you need to do the full copy and collect. That would be really great.
So truncation of the file alone should be done in like milliseconds because it's just changed in the operating system of the file size. So we should still need to block the transactions, but it would be smaller than any practical write to BoltDB.
Yeah. Yeah, a very short stop the world or like a partially concurrent and then a partially stop the world operation would both be like way better than what we have today.
But any transaction in BoltDB is stop the world, like it's exclusively locked, any read-write transaction.
Well, no, you have read-write transactions are concurrent with read transactions. So you can have one read-write transaction and read transactions at the same time. So you might be able to do, but I mean, this I think it's a separate design conversation. But regardless, like doing something along these lines will still be way better than what we do now.
What do you mean by a read-write operation, Joe?
So in BoltDB, you can open two different kinds of transactions. You can open read-only transactions and read-write transactions. And BoltDB's design is that different than many databases is that you can have one read-write transaction open and in read-only transactions at the same time. So you can be reading while a write is happening. Many databases, it's more exclusive than that.
So that actually is confusing me a bit because if you go back to the issue at the top of this issue, if you scroll, I saw that read latencies of API calls was also affected.
Well, remember, I'm just talking about BoltDB, right? I'm not talking about etcd as a whole.
Oh, I see. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, so etcd layers on top of this and introduces a bunch of other things. So you might not, as a user, you're not just directly seeing the behavior of BoltDB.
And the fragmentation is this kind of operation that stops both reads and writes for now. Yeah. And we are brainstorming potential solution where it's stop only writes.
Yeah, yeah, and it's gross for a couple of reasons. One, it's a stop the world. It's a large copy. You copy everything to a new file. One implication of that is that if you have a file that's 4 gigabytes, and you want to be guaranteed your defrag works, you need to have at least 8 gigabytes now, because you could double the disk size temporarily while you do it. Of course, the larger the file is, the worse that is, right? So yeah, there's a couple of things that are kind of gross about it. Cool, I'm glad. Did you get, sorry, I feel like we may have gone on a little bit of a tangent on how to fix defrag. Did we get any information on what you need in kind of like shorter term mitigations?
Yes, so like you're saying, if we can totally avoid defrag, that might be one mitigation. So we still have to see if doing that is enough and we don't run into this issue. Yeah. Even generally, right, outside of defrag or something like that. So, but yeah, one mitigation is to like stop defrag for now, and the others you're saying are more like medium to long term tasks to be fixed within etcd itself, right?
Yeah. I would love if somebody has time to open a couple individual issues for kind of the major subtopics that we mentioned here.
Yeah, I can take on that. And then,
yeah. Awesome, thanks.
Yep.
One more potential idea is to, if we could defrag the files just like when we are running server or updating individual server, maybe there is potential to defrag before starting them, some form of online defrag. The Bolt command line tool allows to defrag files, but I don't know whether it's officially supported to use Bolt command line tool on underlying etcd storage files.
I didn't know it had that. That's interesting.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting idea. Yeah, we can look into those as well.
Yeah, doing more stuff on startup and shutdown seems like a good idea. Also, if we can have some idea of like how much, like if we could somehow measure like what the actual used storage space is versus the file size, as kind of like a proxy measure for like how much empty space there's in the file, that could be really useful, because then like you could potentially, like if you're about to do like creating a backup, then you might know that like, wow, I'm going to be sending a backup file that's like 3x the actual data set size. Maybe I should just do a defrag first or something like that. It could be used in a variety of ways to like make decisions automatically about the need for defrag.
So isn't this the size of the free pages list times the size of a page?
Probably. I think that's a really good start.
All right. Shannon, do you have all you need for now?
Yeah, I guess, yeah. So that sounds good. So I think those two issues that we discussed about, so it seems like Juho will be cutting tickets for those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Giho, when you created the issues, could you add it to the doc as well?
Yeah, I will add it to the Google Docs.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you very much. We seem to cover a lot of important things today. All right.
Okay. Thanks a lot, guys.
Good day and see you
Everyone.
next month.
Bye.
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 Thank
Bye.
you. Goodbye.